Welcome to First Take, the podcast where we explore important topics related to faith, culture, and the human experience. This mic isn't plugged in, and neither are these headphones, but you've probably never noticed that because you skip over the intro. We're diving deep into an essential and often overlooked part of our lives in this episode, Matters of the Mind Part 1. This episode is all about mental health. We'll be shedding light on its importance, its implications on our daily lives, and how our culture and faith can impact it. Seth and John are joined by special guests Carter Everritt, a worship leader at First Moss Bluff, and Samantha LaRocque, a clinical therapist. If you enjoy this conversation and look forward to more, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss an episode. So get comfy and let's unravel the complexities of the mind together. It's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk about it. This is the First Take podcast. Let's get it.
Hello and welcome to the First Take podcast. We are so glad that you are joining us. I am joined by some of my friends. They are going to introduce themselves in just a minute. I'm also here. Well, you're also my friend. It's not that you're not my friend. With Seth Cooley, you probably know both of us from previous episodes of the First Take podcast. I am John Louvier, and to my left here is Samantha LaRocque. Samantha, why don't you tell the listeners who you are, kind of what you do, what your life's about, and that sort of thing.
All right. My name is Samantha LaRocque. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and what that means is I'm a counselor or a therapist, whatever word people are comfortable with. That's what I go with. I went to school for social work. I got my master's in social work, and then I did postgraduate stuff to work in a clinical setting, private practice. So I've been with Lake Charles Memorial now since 2015, and private practice is just outpatient setting. You come in for an hour, you go home. Awesome. So that's what I'm doing. I'm also the co-founder of Holy Restored Ministries. And so our purpose and our mission is to bring Jesus and coping skills together. Mm-hmm. And so that's a huge drive and a passion for Andrea and I. Awesome.
Well, that's good to hear. As you can see, she's probably the most qualified person at the table, I would say. Yeah. No offense to you, Carter. You're getting there. Yeah, but this is also, I would say, my best friend in the whole world. Carter Everritt, why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
Yep. My name is Carter Everritt, and I am 18 years old. I just graduated high school in May. I've been chilling, last summer. And I just started my degree at Liberty Online this past Monday. Nice. Doing their what's it called? Applied ministry degree. Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. Applied ministry. It's important to know.
Yes, it is. I almost wanted to say. I don't know what I wanted to say.
Well, one of the reasons that you're here, and I knew you probably wouldn't mention it, we've seen Carter do ministry over the years. He's been a leader in our student ministry here at First Moss Bluff. He's in First Young Adults now that he's graduated. But we've also seen him lead other high school guys here in the area through the Highway, mm-hmm. Yep. Which is a group of guys who get together every Thursday night and do Bible study. You've been a leader of that. You actually just turned over the reins this past summer.
Yes, in July.
Yeah, and so we know that he has done a lot of ministry, and so that's one of the reasons we wanted mm-hmm. you here and to kind of share your experiences in that. And so today we are going to be talking about a topic that is really important, and we're going to take our time. We're going to really get through this, and that topic, the title of our podcast today is Matters of the Mind, and we know that mental health is a growing concern globally, and it's very important for us to really think about how it intersects with church culture and how we can best serve each other and serve others and really ourselves as we think about our own mental health and that sort of thing. And as we go through this, we want to be sensitive to the fact that some of you listeners out there, you may be in the midst of this struggle right now. We want you to know that we are for you. We want to be an encouragement to you today. We want to give you some resources that are going to help you kind of in this situation and maybe give you some next steps. We always want to talk about next steps here. And make sure that you know exactly what needs to be done. I want to share some stats just to kind of set the table for what we're going to be discussing today, because I think that's really important. And then I'm going to ask some questions and be quiet and let you guys talk honestly and see where the conversation goes from there. But I do think that it's important for us to kind of say where we are as a nation when it comes to our mental health right now. And it says some studies that I saw said 21% of adults are experiencing at least one mental illness. And if you kind of put that in numbers, that's roughly 50 million people in our country. It says right here, 5.5% of adults experience severe mental illness. So the way they differentiate those two is that severe mental illness is usually the things that turn into some type of harm or danger for the patient. 55% of adults with a mental illness have not received any treatment. I thought that was a crazy number. And that makes me think that maybe these numbers are even higher because we just don't know about them. You know, it goes
Correct.
Undiagnosed, right? Over 12 million adults, so that's about 5%, have reported serious thoughts of suicide this year. Anxiety is the number one diagnosed mental illness. 50%. Okay, so that's kind of the adult numbers. And I know we have a lot of parents who tune in to the podcast, and they're thinking and they're wondering about, you know, maybe young people, and we see that it is an issue with young people, even especially. 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14. 75% by age 24. And when it comes to people in the age range of 14 to 25, suicide is the second leading cause of death. All right, which is, you know, from mental illness. And so we need to understand the health challenge that we face when we're thinking about this. It is, I would call it a crisis.
It's a crisis.
Yeah, and Samantha, it feels like in some ways, as you read the studies, as you're looking over things, it feels like it is kind of getting worse, right? And I think a lot of the studies I read point back to 2020 with the COVID pandemic and all the things that were happening that. But we are in actually a unique context here in Southwest Louisiana for 2020 because we not only had COVID, but we also had a couple of hurricanes. And like I have people in my life who are still recovering from the hurricane. Like they aren't all the way back. And so there's a lot of things. And so Samantha, what have you seen change over the last few years when it comes to mental health and the challenges in the culture?
I've honestly seen the stigma get less.
That's
I guess
great.
the stigma decrease because, like you said, in 2020 we had COVID, then we had the hurricanes, but we also had a flood and a freeze.
Yeah.
So
that flood got my house on Lake Charles, by the way.
yeah, it did.
Yeah.
It really did. Yeah.
I think you guys helped me move.
Yeah.
Ripped out the floors and the walls and everything else.
And the thing is that no one was untouched. No one.
Yeah.
You know, and so, and I know we'll talk about this later, but as far as trauma goes in our area, people were saying like, I'm struggling. Even recently we had an issue at our house and with toilets, and it overflowed into the same closet that my husband had to rip out after the hurricanes. And as he's ripping out the carpet, he just stands up and he said, I can't do this. He said, you're going to have to finish. And I'm like, what? You know? But he said, it's too much. And so there is not one person that I know or that I come in contact with every single day that it was not affected by 2020 and that it is still having effects of that. Before that, because I've been in mental health and practicing and working in it since 2008. I started with adolescents in psychiatric hospitals.
Yeah.
Before that, it was definitely more of a taboo. You know, we don't want to talk about it. You don't get help. We can talk about this a little more later, but especially in the church. And then now, I mean, y'all have seen, even with our counseling department, it's booked.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's booked. I stay booked, you know, and so there's such a need. So I've honestly seen it turn a little bit, and that's something that is actually, it's not exciting because that means we're not in a great place,
right.
But that's what I'm here for.
Well, that's the thing is that it points to something maybe negative that so many of us are struggling, but it also points to a positive that people are actually reaching out for help, and maybe some of that is going away. Have you guys seen, like, in your experience with people, what are the most common things people are struggling with, you know, as they come in, as they're talking about things? What's the most common thing? And I know you guys counsel people. You talk to people that are your friends and all that, so y'all can jump in on this too. What are the most common things that y'all are seeing, and you, Samantha?
Anxiety.
Yeah,
I would second that.
Yep.
And how are people kind of, what's bringing on that anxiety? Is it like being unsure about the future? Is it, unsure about, like, what is it that is bringing about that anxiety?
In my experience, like anything and everything. Like I can't even imagine if I tried to pinpoint one particular thing. So yeah, I don't know. Like it just case by case, I guess, in conversations. Yeah. And like my setting is less counseling and more conversation.
Right.
I guess that's what I would probably call it. I guess it could be, both and. But yeah.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It's definitely more conversation. But over the past year, I would say I've talked to a lot of people who are under the age of 20 that socially are more anxious than ever.
Wow.
Like with their friends at school, at work, that kind of thing, or at family life. Anxiety, but specifically socially. And maybe they didn't even know that they struggled with that until recently.
Yeah. What do you think brought that on? Do you think it was, us just being locked in our homes for a little while, or?
Yeah, I think that has a huge part of it.
Yeah.
I think social media and, all of the pressures of, high schoolers specifically, because that's what I have experience with.
Sure.
I see that a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. People trying to cope with, the changes in the culture and, all the different things that we're doing. And then we don't always go to the best sources for information and knowledge, right? You mentioned social media. And sometimes that can be a great source, and other times it can be the absolute worst source for what we're doing. So I love what Samantha said. This is probably a thing. It's an issue that affects everyone. No one is immune from feeling the effects of this. Even if you don't struggle with this personally, you probably have someone in your house that does. Mm-hmm. Statistics would tell us that. And so we need to understand that this is an important issue for all of us. Trauma, you mentioned trauma just a minute ago, and that is usually what triggers mental illness in people. It's something from a past experience or even a current circumstance, and that trauma is usually what causes that. And so understanding what trauma is probably pretty important. So Seth, I want to come to you. In your experience, I know that you've been talking with a lot of people, and trauma is something that you've really been digging in on in our conversations. How would you define trauma in someone's life?
I would say that I think that at first glance, we want to define it as something really, really bad that has happened to us in the past. Something, catastrophic with our relationships or our physical experience, our physical health, or the
hurricanes.
The hurricane, yeah, physically displacing us. But I would, as I've grown, I would probably define that as less of that and more of anything that causes us to veer away from what we know to be true, spiritually, in just physically in the real world, anything that probably causes us to believe something that is not necessarily true or real. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I think that's a great definition. One that I had kind of written down for us too, and it goes along with what you're saying. It's not original to me. It's one that I heard. Mm-hmm. Circumstances that the enemy has used to place lies in our heart and mind. Yeah. Right. And so that doesn't have to be these giant things. It could be anything. It could be what someone has said, a parent, maybe something that they planted into your mind about yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's a lie that we go on to believe and kind of think is real. And so I think that that's an important thing for us to kind of look at. And so Carter, you've led tons of young guys in Bible study over the years, and a lot of times dudes, but even I think it goes for everybody, but especially dudes, they're kind of programmed to stuff and just act like it doesn't hurt them. And so what would you say to someone who believes, I don't have any trauma, and if I did, I shouldn't talk about it. I should just get over it and kind of move on with my life?
Yeah, well, I think for me, in my personal experience, talking about mental struggles, talking about anxiety, talking about stress, or like how you're talking about trauma, talking about it is one of the main things to me that works, that helps me progress in that struggle personally. And so I would say, if you want to see change, I would say the first step is to get wisdom, get help, get community from the people in your life. And maybe that's, for me, my parents, or maybe that's a small group or somebody that's a Jesus follower. Yeah. But I think that it's always helped me, even whenever I didn't want to talk about it. It's always been worth it.
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah. Samantha, I know probably people coming into your practice, even if the stigma is being lifted that people will come in, I bet it still is hard for people to open up. And so how do you help people who feel like, bringing this stuff up hurts and I don't really want to do it? How do you help them get past that and really talk about stuff and be authentic and open?
Yeah. So when you come in for therapy, your first session is an evaluation, and you don't know this, but it's 10 pages of questions, that I've got in my head that I have to ask. And so that is everything from what's going on right now. And I tell people, you start wherever you want to start. Mm-hmm. If you want to tell me what's going on right now, or if you want to give me your whole life story, I'm here for it. And so a lot of times it's, okay, this is where, it's my family, or it's my job, or it's my health, or whatever it might be. And then I walk them back to childhood, and things like that. So it comes up naturally. It's not just a interrogation room, with the lights in there. And I also say, like, see, my office is pretty, I'm normal. Like, this is not a scary situation, to try to, bring down their guards. And going back to trauma, Carter, what y'all said, as far as people don't want to talk about it because it's so trauma, right? We think it has to be something horrific.
Yeah, it feels like a heavy word.
Yeah, and we all have trauma. It's anything that's uncomfortable.
If there was a better word, I would use a better word.
Yeah, like if
you know
we
what I'm
could figure
saying?
one out.
Yeah, and
we should maybe decide.
So in the clinical world, we're moving. So when you think of trauma, we think of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And when we think of PTSD, what do y'all think of?
veterans.
Soldiers.
Right.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have that level of trauma. It's criterion A if you're diagnosing it, to have that. But now you can have little t trauma, and even for anybody, it's what's your first memories of being embarrassed? What are your childhood memories? What's your family dynamics like? Were you, picked on as a kid? Were you sensitive as a kid? Were you the class clown and always, getting in trouble? Breakups, having to make decisions about college and life before your brain is formed, I might add.
Right.
We're supposed to figure out what we want to do. Most of us get married. Our brains form at 25. So most of us get married before our brain is formed.
The most important life decisions.
Most of us have children.
Right.
I didn't. My brain was formed. But most of us have children before our brains are formed.
Yeah.
That's huge. And so you're not supposed to know what to do. So when I say your brain, it's your prefrontal cortex, which is your decision making and judgment. Before that, you're just emotions.
Right.
So there's that. So anything that you might go through before 25 can be labeled traumatic if you don't deal with it correctly, or if it's stressful, which it's all going to be stressful. So you can have little t trauma. So now they call it adverse life experiences.
Adverse life experiences.
All right.
Yeah.
That
It's kind
sounds
of
better.
a mouthful.
It is, but it sounds better. I bet we'd get further with people that we're talking about it with.
Yes. What are your adverse life experiences? Yeah.
But that's an important thing. So, I mean, you said that before your brain is fully developed, that you're all emotions. Does that mean that it takes longer for women to be fully formed? Because we did say that we would do this a couple of times, right?
No,
You said.
I think that was
We
talked
didn't
about
say.
before I sat down.
It was.
No, I think we have a double
just teasing.
dose.
Yeah,
we have a double dose.
Yeah, you're even better at it.
We're formed.
Yeah, I got you. I understand. No, I like what you're saying, though, because it's the little things that we tend to ignore that often shape who we are and the way we react to certain situations. And we don't even know it until it's too late. We don't even know it until like we're in the midst of a reaction and we're like, oh man, where did that come from? Yep. Sort of thing. And so I think it's important to realize that this is something that probably is something all of us should be thinking about. And we should be, the Bible tells us to examine our hearts and examine our lives. I think it's important for us to examine these things. Like too many of us are just, we just resign to the fact that, oh, this is who I am. This is what I do. Maybe we should be a little bit more intentional about why am I this way?
Yeah. What's formed that in me, that reaction,
100%.
Yeah.
And so I want us to kind of shift gears a little bit and think about, all right, so this is an issue for all of us. and we want to know, like, all right, so how do we get help? What do we do? And one of the things that we can do to obviously to get help as people who love Jesus, us four at this table, I know for sure, is we need to understand like what role our relationship with Jesus plays when it comes to our mental health. And I realize that some of our listeners, maybe you haven't placed your faith in Jesus yet. I would say just listen to what we're talking about and maybe think about that decision and think about what Jesus can do. Because I can tell you from personal experience, Jesus can change everything in your life, and he can affect this part of your life as well. But I want to ask all of you to kind of think about how do you see that interaction of mental health and spiritual health, and maybe let's ask the question: should they remain separate, or should it be all of the above approach to healing from the mental and mental health struggles that people face? Go ahead, Seth.
I mean, I'll give my opinion. I do not think that they should remain separate. Obviously, I'm not no professional counselor or anything like that. But I think Scripture, if you're a follower of Jesus especially, Scripture is very clear about that being a part of what it means to follow Jesus. The renewal of the mind, do not be conformed, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Philippians 4 gives a command to not be anxious. And so, like, obviously we have to reconcile the tension of what anxiety is and how Scripture addresses that. And so to me, it's not a this corner of my life and this corner of my life, and the two are separate. It's like crash in the middle to me.
Yeah, for sure. I hear that. How have you guys seen that work in your own life personally? Maybe have you seen those two things come together and you experience some healing through both of them working together? Maybe talking with someone, and maybe it's not a professional counselor, but talking with a friend and opening up about your mental health struggles, but also like getting help from Holy Spirit and from Jesus and the teachings of the Bible and that sort of thing. How have you seen that work in your life?
Yeah, I think for me, anxiety is a big struggle for me.
Yeah.
Like fear, dread of the future, and even of the past is a thing that I face on a daily basis. And I think prayer is a huge thing. Just simply giving God control is probably the biggest thing for me, because I realize that whenever I struggle with this anxiety and I struggle with dread of the future and all of these things, it's really me wanting to control that future whatever circumstance. But really giving God that control. And to be completely honest, like sometimes that doesn't take away, the fear or even the feelings that I have. But I do know that I'm being obedient because of those scriptures, like you were talking about a second ago. And so knowing those scriptures, I think is huge, talking to people about that. But then prayer, I think surrendering control to God is probably the biggest thing for me personally.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing to bring up, because I would be willing to bet that a lot of what people are experiencing is the feeling that they're losing control, right? Whenever we're in the midst of a crisis.
That's what it is. We're trying to grasp at straws to keep that control. And I'm in a secular setting, right? I never really know where they stand spiritually, and that is on my evaluation, but I don't lead out with that.
Sure.
But I'm very transparent, and I will say things, about God and just fill them out and things like that. Whenever there's such a difference when I have believers in my office, because I can speak to that fear. I can speak to that trust. I remember being 18 and not knowing what I was going to do. I remember, not knowing who I was going to marry. I remember all of that. That's very real. And God cares about that. That's not silly. And so whenever, as Christians, if we're able to walk people through that trust, and, like you bring up that scripture. So the word anxiety was in the Bible. I mean, we didn't make that word up,
No.
And so those are things where if I've got someone who's struggling with, why did this happen with me? Why did this happen to me when I was a child? Big T trauma, okay? Abuse, things like that. It's walking them through and helping them see that it doesn't make sense and I don't have the answers, but I do know that God was there. Now, it can get tricky with, why did God allow this to happen?
Sure,
and I know that's not really where we're going, but I mean, I hear all those questions.
But it's an important point, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that. Except I do know the traumas in my life, And even, as close as a year and a half ago, when I'm asking God, why, and he's bringing up the scripture, the Great Commission, so that you can go and make disciples, because I need your testimony.
That's
and
right.
then births ministry and other opportunities and a renewal to where it's not like, why did this happen to me? And he also told me, as a counselor, there are things I might go through that I don't need you to give. I don't need you to give air to those words. I don't need you to give breath to those words. I need you to come to me with them. So I'm in my prayer closet with him. Why? Instead of in a counseling session, because I need to go to him for that. Now, obviously, I have a job, and there's a reason I have a job. And so a lot of times it's just processing with people, but I want them to be able to do it on their own too.
Absolutely.
And so that's giving them the resources. It's giving them the confidence, even, Carter, for someone your age, to learn to trust at your age is gonna, that's
Game
just gonna,
changer.
yeah, that's huge.
Absolutely. And, Carter mentioned a couple things. You mentioned a couple things about the word speaking into our lives. And, all of us have the same, what I've learned is that all of us kind of have the same struggles. They just wear different clothes. They might look a little different, but it's kind of the same struggle.
Relatable. Very relatable.
Yeah. And so the Bible may not speak specifically to a struggle that you're currently facing or what you're currently going through, but what it will do is it'll give you timeless truths and timeless promises to hold on to in the midst of those things. And so, when it comes to our sense of wanting control in all situations, the Bible is clear that Jesus says, come to me, all who are weary, I will give you rest. Like, he wants us to lay our burdens upon him, and he wants us to lay it on our community. I think that's important things for us to remember as we're going through this, is that even if, it doesn't speak specifically, it speaks to like the heart of God, and it speaks to some things that we need to remember as we're kind of thinking about this. Samantha, you mentioned your prayer closet, and I want us to talk about that a little bit because Carter said prayer was something that has really gotten him through a lot of different things. Tell us about your prayer closet. Tell us why. I know about this a little bit already, but I want the audience to kind of know about this and why.
Just the same closet with the float toilet.
Well,
Is it really?
no.
Oh, okay. All right.
But so I got a video at 4:30 p.m. one day, and Kyle had gotten home before me, and it was a video of, because our toilet is here and my prayer closet is here. And he was like, I don't know what you've been praying, but these spiritual beings don't like the things that you've been praying, and overflowed our toilet all day.
Gosh.
Right?
Yeah.
And it did. It got into my prayer closet, but it actually stopped. I had a family picture, one of our canvas pictures that, it's old, right? Only has 2 children in it. The third one wasn't even in it yet.
Yeah.
So it was just in there, and the water stopped before it even ruined that picture. So anyhow, but yeah. My prayer closet.
Tell us about it, and tell us why it has become such an important part of your life.
Yeah, it's I'm in it every morning. It's important for me. I'm a mom of 3 boys. It's important for me to have quiet, and not just because I'm an introvert. It's just important. And if I'm in my living room, or if I'm in my dining room or my kitchen, and I've done all of that, I get distracted.
Right.
I need to multitask. I need to do the dishes. I'm listening to this or whatever. And so this room, it was just like a extra storage room. It wasn't intentionally built as my prayer closet. It was just an extra storage room. And I've taken it over a little bit at a time. And then my husband built me tons of shelves to hold all my books in it, and has made it just something that's real special to me. And that's just where I go and where I'm quiet, and
It's awesome.
yeah, they know where to find me. If I'm not, the baby, they'll come in and sit in there with me and all of that stuff. So it's just something for my boys to see too.
Yeah, what a good legacy to leave for your
hope
kids,
so. Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
So we've all heard people say that the solution to these mental health struggles is just to have more faith. And I know that we've all said that we disagree with that. We say that these things kind of work together. It's an all of the above approach, that we need to work on our spiritual health, but there is a way to work on our mental health as well, and there are techniques and solutions that we should be doing, and seeing a therapist or seeing a counselor could be part of that, right? And so, but we know that you just need to have more faith is out there. We know that mindset is out there. We know that some people who are in the midst of the struggle, they may have family members who are saying things like that. And so, Samantha, I want to come to you because I'm sure you've encountered this in your practice. How would you respond to someone who may be avoiding seeking professional help because they're worried that might mean that they don't have enough faith to heal themselves or for God to heal them? Yeah,
it's very delicate. But if I'm going to be a straight shooter, I'm going to say, and how's that working for you?
Right.
I stand in front of churches. I stand in front of, I speak at retreats also. And so I know, and I know that God's given me talents and gifts, and I know I'm where I'm supposed to be. So you can't tell me that he doesn't care about mental health. You can't tell me that it's real. Mm-hmm. Was it in the, Garden of Eden? No, but it's a consequence, of what's happened. And so he created us. And if he created us, then there's nothing wrong with you. It's just the way that you're reacting. Some of us have a higher tolerance to stress. Some of us have a better foundation than others. Some of us have parents that we can go to and they can speak life into us. And then some of us don't, and so it's just a combination of that. I know a lot of Christians obviously struggle with it. They don't want to admit that they're having, especially suicidal thoughts,
right?
Homicidal thoughts. They don't self-harm. They don't want to admit to that. They also don't want to be on medication.
Right.
They feel like they should be able to pray and God's going to heal them. And I'm not trying to say that can't happen. And I'm not trying to say that doesn't happen. But if you get off of your medicine and then you start having suicidal thoughts or you start having even physical pain, I hear that a lot. Well, I'm starting to have all these physical pain again. That's depression. Depression is physical. I don't have much motivation. I don't, this and this. I'm trying to wean myself off from the medicine. I don't want to take my anxiety medicine like the doctor prescribed it. I don't want to be dependent on it. How's that working for you?
Right.
And so that's just a candid approach to that. And my clients will always be like, I know. Men and women. With men, it's a pride thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it.
Most things with men are.
Absolutely. Actually I don't see men in my practice.
Okay, yeah.
It's just something that it's a boundary that I've set.
Sure.
It's a boundary that I've been asked to set, and I've respected that.
Yeah.
But even young adults, or I do adolescents, teenage boys, and then I'll have some that I've seen in their early adolescence, and so in their 20s they'll have problems again, and they'll come back.
Right.
Because I know their story and they trust me, and so I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But there's just some things that it kind of falls off. Because of pride, because of anger, because they start to believe the lies that they need to do this, this, and this to cover it up. It's a coping skill. You don't need to go to therapy.
Yeah.
Just, come drink with us.
Buck
or,
up.
Whatever. Yeah. So it's a challenge to get someone out of that mind space. But I'm just real patient with them.
Gotcha.
And let them process it on their own.
Mm-hmm. How have y'all encouraged people in your life to kind of move past those feelings? Because I know you've probably run across it. I have in my family and amongst close friends really worked hard, especially when it comes to medicine, because these types of struggles run in my family. We've had some suicides in my family, dealing with mental health, and so I'm really sensitive to when people are struggling and to not make them feel like, oh, you're weird or you don't have enough faith or anything like that. And so I've tried to really encourage people to do what the doctors are saying, and then let's work on, because sometimes going to the counselor and then taking the medicine that you're supposed to be taking, it can clear the brain so that you can actually do the work that needs to be done on the spiritual side.
So medicine alone doesn't always work.
Right.
And therapy alone doesn't always work. When I get kids who come into me because they're getting in trouble for being hyper at school, and then by 3:30 p.m. they're throwing balls at the wall in my office, I can't do much with that.
Right.
Like, teach them techniques to, stop themselves and have more self-control. They're pieced out.
Yeah.
Or, we're trying to evaluate if they need medicine, for hyperactivity and things. And so I can't really talk therapy is only going to go so far if the brain is not able to receive it.
Yeah.
And then medication alone might take the edge off the intensity of the feelings, but what's the root of it? You're not processing the root of rejection, the root of fear, the root of abandonment. And those are things that I don't have to bring scripture to in the beginning. I think that God puts all the people in my office and they all end up hearing about him. But those things are real, and I can call them roots.
Yeah.
And someone might not be suspicious of, that's a Christian word,
Yeah, sure.
But those are the roots. And so therapy, it's like a yarn. I also say, like, you come and you give me your yarn and it's all in knots and I'm just trying to sort it out and detangle it for you. So that's how both of them work together. So yes.
Yeah, definitely.
What was your original question?
Just how have you encouraged people to not avoid it, to get past the idea that they don't need the help and they don't need, professional help or medicine or anything like that?
Sure. I haven't had as much experience personally with feeling the need to encourage someone to seek out medicine, but I have on numerous occasions had experiences where I did encourage people to seek professional help. So a biblical counselor, someone like yourself. And so to me, that is easier and a first step, I guess, if that's correct.
It is.
And so, like, I've had more experience in those scenarios, and people my age, I think, are less gun shy about that. And so, like, I don't find myself having to really, really convince people to go and do that sort of thing. And if I do, to me, I find that it's less about a pride stigma with people my age and more along the lines of, I don't want to either do the work that it's going to take to deal with the issue, or put myself through the pain that it's going to require ahead of time.
Yeah.
To use your yarn illustration, like pulling those strings out is painful.
It's painful.
And so I experience more that than I don't want people to, view me a certain way, or I don't, that's my experience.
That's
with
a good
that.
point. Yeah.
No, and I love that you brought that up, because I think that's an important thing to point out, is that one of the sayings that I read over the last couple of days was, going through this is hard, like soul care is hard, but continuing to not heal is also hard. So you have to choose your hard. Yeah. And so how do you encourage people to get over that fear of, man, I just don't want to bring this stuff up because it hurts every time. So how do you encourage people to get past those thoughts?
I mean, I would lovingly say, kind of what you just said, and like,
how's that working for you?
How's that going for you right now? And to me, I try and remind people, and for my own, like in my own process, like my own thinking, we live in a sinful, messed up world. Yeah. And so, to me, you have one of two ways to deal with that. And one of them involves Jesus in your processing of how you think and how you handle your trauma, your stress, your anxiety, your past, your circumstances, or you have everything else. And that's not to say that counseling or medicine or anything else is not involved, obviously, in the Jesus route. But I kind of just use Samantha's approach of like, man, like, what else do you have? Like, what other, if you're a follower of Jesus, what other option do you have other than to continue feeling what you're feeling? Yeah.
Because in this life, you will have tribulations.
That's right.
But take heart, I've overcome the world, and so pick up your cross. There's countless scriptures that say you're going to struggle. You don't get a choice of who your parents are. You don't get a choice of where you're born. You know, and so those are things that are going to affect you. So I would like to say, and this is going to be helpful, but when we speak to people and trying to get them to process if they need help or not, to get a diagnosis, you have to struggle with something more than 2 weeks. So your depression, a 2-week period, you have more bad days than good days. Anxiety, 2-week period. That's kind of the marker. And then if you feel like it's affecting your daily living, I can't get out of bed. I'm not bathing. Maybe I'm on medicine, but it's not really the right medicine. I'm not even taking it or whatever. I'm not going to work. My family's falling apart. Those are huge kind of warning signs. So someone y'all's age might not have all of that, but it's, I can't do my schoolwork. I can't go to class. I can't complete this. Isolation. I know. Yeah. Carter, you talked about that. Social anxiety is so big. Even with the elderly clients, and going back to the grocery store after COVID. That's a real thing for y'all's generation. And so it's, how is it affecting your life? And what are some ways that it's a problem? And how is it helping? Is it helping you in any way?
Yeah.
Just asking open-ended questions to get them to kind of think a little bit, and to where you're not giving your opinion,
right?
But it's just walking them through so that they can hear it for themselves.
That's an important part of community. Point of community is too many times we like to give our opinions and we don't just talk to people and listen and ask them questions, like ask them actually how they're feeling. And sometimes we just need to shut up and let people talk, and that's the best way that we can be in community with somebody. And so I love that you mentioned that. One of the things that I want us to talk a little bit about is something that I came across, the difference between self-care and soul care. So the culture kind of tells us to worry about ourselves and to go through this function of self-care. And so like self-care is very peripheral. It's very surface level. It's tactics that we use to kind of numb us or distract us from what is really going on in our lives. This could be things like drinking, drugs. It could be things like relationships that aren't good for us. It could be things
Netflix.
Social media, Netflix, all that. It could be things like overeating. It could be spending too much money, going shopping. I know that's a thing for a lot of people. And so, why are you laughing? But
that's what I did yesterday.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I struggle with the overeating part of that. Like that's what I use in my own life to kind of numb out and not do that. And so that would be self-care, but like that's what the culture tells us we need more of, is to kind of do some of that, versus soul care, which is more inward focused to expose kind of the underlying issues that are causing the behaviors that we would like to change. And so I want us to maybe think a little bit about how have you seen those two things interact in your own life, where you have maybe given into the self-care side, but then come around to the soul care side and really seen, because soul care is not only spiritual health, it's also mental health, and it could be done by just your relationship with Jesus. It could be done by community in life. It could be done by help from professionals, that type of soul care that it really digs in. So how have you seen personally those two things interact and you kind of come around away from the self-care model that the culture pushes?
Me?
Yeah. Anybody?
For me personally, I have to think about how is it filling me? I love Netflix, but it's a waste of time, and even so for me, I like to take a bath and I watch Netflix, and but those are things in the last 4 or 5 months. I still bathe, but I will not. I will
Thank
not.
goodness.
I know.
Yeah.
Let me disclaimer. I will not turn on Netflix. I will turn on a sermon. I will grab a book, and then that always makes me sleepy, so that works. But those are things that I have said. Netflix isn't necessarily bad, but are the things that I'm watching doing anything to renew my mind? A binge of Love is Blind is real fun. but those people.
It's an interesting choice.
Those people. But I do love, I mean, I think that's so cool, you know?
Yeah.
But is that doing anything to help me? No. And so that is something, and even to be like, okay, well then, you know, you need to take a shower, you need to take a quick shower, then you need to go read your Bible. You know, those are things where it's self-control and it's discipline, because there's so many things for me as a mom of 3, you know, a wife, but you know, I have a job and all these other things. I'm empty by the end of the day, and Netflix isn't going to fill me up. So I think that's how you come around to it. People that I see, it just kind of depends. It's a work in progress for everybody. Carter, I mean, for me, I guess it would be good for me to know, like, y'all's age, you're older, but what does self-care look like for y'all?
Yeah, I think for me and a lot of people my age, or at least that I'm friends with, just staying excessively busy just for the sake of, you know, keeping your mind off maybe whatever's stressing you out. Or for me, I know at least, just like going nonstop and not taking time maybe to sit down and, you know, maybe it's spiritual disciplines, maybe it's talking to people. I don't know what that is for everybody, but I know for me, just staying busy, just to, you know, not have to think about, you know, what I'm worried about and that kind of thing. And so even if I am busy, I know I can't always control that. But taking the time in the morning, at night, whenever that may be, to really, you know, like Seth said earlier, like set my mind on, you know, like in Philippians 4, what is true, lovely, honorable, all those things. So, yeah.
I think that's interesting that you bring up busyness as a form of numbing out. I didn't think about that, but like I can easily see that in people, and I can see that in myself even.
And I think it can even be like,
I think that's a man thing.
It could be, yeah, for sure.
And like, it doesn't have to be bad things. It could literally be like, you know, coming
really
up to
great
church.
things,
Like, it could be serving.
Yeah,
it could be all
of
those
course.
things. So yeah, I don't think it's always bad.
Right.
Yeah, and Carter, I'm gonna come back to you because I think we've all been triggered by trauma, circumstances, different things in our lives, and a lot of times our reaction to that is to avoid. And so to do some of the things that we're talking about under that self-care, that kind of avoidance mentality. So how can we keep from doing that? Going back to that same dry well that produces the same results. How have you really disciplined yourself to not do the thing that you know isn't great for you?
Yeah, I know it sounds really simple and it's much harder said than done. But really remembering like the calling as a Jesus follower is uncomfortable. Like it is painful. Like you were talking about earlier, denying yourself, taking up your cross. And so whenever I do that, it's not going to be fun. But I know, you know, if my priorities are on those eternal things, which they're not always, but if they should be, then I'm going to, you know, even count that hardship of the pain or whatever, the uncomfortability, and that to be a sense of growth in my relationship with Jesus. And so I know that, like I said, that's much easier for me to say than to actually do, but I think remembering that following Jesus was never supposed to be comfortable. And every time that I've leaned into that uncomfortability, it's always been worth it.
That's awesome.
And I've always seen growth. And so I don't know. That's a big idea said really simply, but it's hard to do.
Seth, would your answer be similar or different to that?
No, I think Carter's spot on. I would just like to highlight just the idea that, and going off of what he said, is pain is not always a bad thing.
Yeah.
And to go back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, you're going to experience it one way or another. And so let it mean something. And so
let it mean something. I love that.
Let it mean something in the sense that it is allowed to produce something beneficial in your life. And so, you know, Carter mentioned earlier, and I know this about him, but that when he does turn to prayer, we were talking about prayer at the beginning of the podcast, his feelings don't always go away. And so there's still a level of pain there, but pushing through that to get to the point to when there is the complete surrender, and then there is peace after prayer and thanksgiving that we talked about in Philippians 4. When you get to that point, that's a stepping stone that gets built in your walk with the Lord. And you don't arrive at that place by choosing to not do the work and not experience some of the pain that it requires.
No, definitely see that.
And we got some resources from different places, but there's a pastor that I like to listen to. His name's JP, Jonathan Pecluda, and he talks about weakness being our greatest advantage in our dependence. If dependence upon Christ is the goal, then weakness would be the advantage. And so I would say, like, you use your pain and your weakness, like he's talking about, rather than being busy or watching Netflix or because your life's still going to be hard with those things.
One of the things that I've noticed in my own life is the reason that I try to avoid this is because I have the wrong perspective on it, which is exactly what you're talking about. And so I'd just like for all of us to think about, and we don't even need to discuss this, but just think about what it would look like in our lives if we would go from seeing some of these difficult feelings of anxiousness and, even hurt, even sadness, that sort of thing, as maybe it could be the Holy Spirit putting his finger on something that you need to do some work on, an area of your life that you need to kind of dig into, and go from seeing these things as a threat to avoid, which is what we're doing. We're self-protection. That's kind of the MO for most people right off the start is that self-protection. So instead of seeing it as a threat to be avoided, see it as a signal or a warning to be listened to and to be dug in on, and to kind of see where God is taking us in those moments. Pastor Brian, he says to use that type of mentality in prayer. If something keeps distracting you in prayer, it could be because Holy Spirit is saying, this is where I want you to be focused, and that sort of thing. And so that's really important for us to know that and kind of avoid that if we're doing this.
Just to add, the whole avoidance idea, like, that's not a new thing because Netflix is around now. Like, Adam and Eve avoided God in the garden when they sinned and experienced shame for the very first time. They went and hid and ran and covered themselves up with
And you don't have to teach toddlers how to do any of that.
No, that's a human experience.
The idea of the avoidance of what I can't control and the truth about myself and my sinful nature, that's an age-old thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Samantha, how do you help people who say things like, "Oh, this is the way I've always been. This is just who I am. I'll never change because my dad was this way, my mom was this way, my auntie was this way." You like that? Auntie?
Your auntie?
I mean, I'm in Southwest Louisiana.
Auntie up.
But anyway, how do you help people through those feelings of, this is who I am, I'm never changing?
They are usually coming to me because they've already reconciled with not enjoying that, not being happy with the way that they're responding. And as of late, I would say most of my work with my clients is on boundaries. And it's because of behaviors that they have, but also behaviors that are in their family or the way that they've allowed people to treat them that are giving them this intense anxiety because they've allowed people to walk all over them. They've allowed people to treat them a certain way. And so when we work on boundaries are icky. Boundaries do not feel good. Boundaries offend other people. There's really, it's so
Parents
so tricky.
hate boundaries whenever they need them.
I know. Yeah.
I've seen the same thing.
I know. And kids hate boundaries, I mean, take away Fortnite and
Yeah, true.
I mean, we don't like it, but, and I've said this, I feel like all week. I have these themes that tend to come in week to week. And so it's like you have to have some breaking in order to set new boundaries.
Yeah.
So something has to break for you to set boundaries. So they come to me, they've already reconciled that they don't like the way this feels. And I just have to walk them through the thing that they're projecting on someone else. What are you actually responsible for? How are you actually reinforcing their behaviors? Are you, this is a big one for boundaries, are you giving them all this information because you think you owe them an explanation and then you're offended because they have an opinion? Well, you giving them information is opening the door to their opinion. No, I'm not. Teens and things and parents, we have every right to have information. But maybe as an adult, or maybe, adults, we're not new adults, we're older adults.
Yeah.
When we're giving friends or anything information, we're married. You're not going to go and vent about your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other person has no right to have an opinion about your marriage, your relationship.
Needs to be more sacred than that.
Yeah, even your children. I've got great friends, and we all know that there's ups and downs in marriages. None of us throw our spouses under the bus.
Yeah.
Joking sometimes, but not in a real sense. And nobody really gives that opinion, because we all know that, hey, that's yours, and that's between you two.
And all of us are for that relationship.
Absolutely, absolutely. So boundaries. And so most people come in and they're already they're tired of it. So I say, how's that working for you? And they're like, obviously it's not working. That's why I'm here. So that's a good place to start. I'm like, okay, good. But that doesn't mean that they set it. And then I just have to continue working with roots. Why can't you set this? Why don't you have the confidence to set this?
Wow, yeah.
Why don't you have more self-worth?
Think that you're worth these boundaries.
Yes. Yeah.
I know I've seen that in my own counseling and just being with friends. The boundaries is a huge issue. And a book that I've read, Amber's read it, my wife, I've recommended it to a bunch of people. It's actually called Boundaries. It has a red pencil on the front if you're looking for it. We'll actually link it in the show notes so that you can find that book. But it's been an incredible help because it is really hard to do it, but they're necessary to really have good relationships. And what I've seen is when people have put those boundaries in place, including myself, those relationships, it may be rocky at first, but they actually end up being better.
Yeah, it's healthier.
Because it was toxic before, even though everybody thought it was all okay, it was pretty toxic, right? And so definitely think about, I didn't expect boundaries to come up in this conversation, but I probably should have expected it.
And when we talk about anxiety, you have expectations that I talk about a lot. What are your expectations for yourself? What are the expectations that you're having for other people? And I know Pastor Brian's talked about it too, but I can't expect my husband to make me happy. That's not his job. That's not his role. Marriage is to make you holy.
Amen.
Parenthood is to make you holy. Parenthood brings me to that prayer room every day, that prayer closet, because I don't know how to raise these people. I don't know, Lord, you gave them these strengths, help me survive it. But it's not to make you happy. It can bring you joy, and both of those things bring me joy. But what are my expectations of my husband? What are my expectations of my kids? What are my expectations of my parents, of my friends, whatever that might be? Boundaries are always a topic, because if you have a people-pleasing personality, you're going to struggle with it. It feels icky.
Yeah.
And then the other thing for anxiety is what's on your plate. What are your priorities? And if your priorities are shifting, then you're going to be anxious. If I am procrastinating, which I'm a procrastinator, I've really actually never met anyone who's not.
Yeah.
To some degree,
There's a new book that actually says procrastination isn't the worst thing in the world.
I'm not a procrastinator.
So I want to get that book and read it.
Good for you.
I want to get that book
your
and read
secrets.
it. So
I mean, it's not.
No, I'm just joking.
But
yeah, I'm kidding.
It doesn't, and sometimes I can perform better, with when I've got that deadline, but procrastinating and digging your head in the sand, it doesn't do anything to get rid of your anxiety.
Well, it's a form of avoidance, which is what we were talking about.
Yes.
It's funny that you would say that your husband's job isn't to make you happy, or your marriage isn't to make you happy, it's to make you holy. My quiet time yesterday. Too. Yeah, my quiet time yesterday was one of the lines that I wrote, and in the quiet time was, even our salvation isn't to make us happy, it's to make us holy. And the difference is that holiness is more about being fully devoted to God and more like Jesus. And so when you say that, that's what those relationships are for, when they're operating in their best light, right?
Yeah.
And so relationships are often, it's a weird tension with relationships, and I want us to kind of end here as we're thinking about this, is relationships are often the root of trauma in our lives, like toxic ones, places where we've been hurt, where we've been wounded, while at the same time, God will use relationships to heal you. And so there's a tension of, the problem is when we have so much, negative experiences when it comes to relationships in our past, we often avoid relationships in our present. But God uses community in order to heal us. And so I want to ask you guys, where do you place the importance of community in this process of seeking out your mental health and just encouraging people to improve their own mental health? Where does community fall into that?
I think for me, it's been very, very vital. And I think that, having other people that struggle with the same thing, maybe it's a little bit different, because I know like anxiety is kind of and mental struggles are like a nuanced topic. But I think talking about that with other people and understanding that you're not the only one is really important. And especially if you prioritize Jesus, like we were talking about earlier, I think that makes all the difference.
For sure. I can see that. Anybody else?
That's awesome. I think whenever you're talking to people and you're sharing, it's all about relating. That's why we vent. That's why you post something on social media, because you want someone to affirm you and, to make you know that, yeah, I agree with you, but that's not always good.
Sure.
So that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the ways that I've seen relationships really heal a lot of this is what you're talking about. Actually, having people who love me enough to call out the lies in my own life, the lies that I'm believing, because sometimes I'm fearful of calling out those lies. I'm avoiding them. I'm minimizing them even. But when I've had the best relationships, it's been guys in my life, and even my wife Amber, that have stepped up even when it was uncomfortable, to say, "Hey man, you're really missing it here. Mm-hmm. Like, you're missing the mark. You're blinded to this. You don't see it, but I see it for you." And it brings another perspective. It brings another view on things, and it really helps me kind of see. And so community.
And Satan hates community.
Oh, he hates it.
Satan wants you to be isolated.
That's right.
Satan loved COVID, But look at all of the things that actually came from it as far as the way that we stayed connected. Of course, there's tons of negatives, but the positives. But he loves to tell people that you're the only one like this. You're weak.
Yeah.
Nobody else is going to want to talk about this. No one else is going to struggle, because if he can keep you in that corner, then he's got you. When I was growing up, my parents divorced when I was 11, and nobody else was going through that. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't anything that was talked about. It wasn't, everybody else had normal, and even my friends now, like I'm the only one with divorce, that dynamic.
Yeah.
And it really isn't something that I talk about all the time, but it's also been a way that Satan has kind of weaving rejection and lies and, isolation in my life that I've had to continue to nail to the cross.
Right.
Because yes, what you meant for harm, God has absolutely used for good.
Yeah, for sure. How about we share some stories of like people we have seen, and we don't want to use names, as we've said, that we've seen who have found support, who have been isolated, but then found support within a community that you've actually seen from afar, where it has completely changed them, changed their mindset. I'll start while you guys think about kind of maybe a story from your own life. There was this girl that I was in small group with for years, and coming into small group, she was isolated. She didn't really have a place to call home or anything like that. And over the years, her and her husband, they had issues with getting pregnant. They had different types of issues mentally and just over the years. And I have seen the Lord use people praying for her, like even in her darkest moments of she didn't believe that she could ever change. She didn't believe that the Lord would ever deliver her. But there were people in her life, in our small group and in our church, who believed for her. And she didn't need to, because they had enough belief for her. And like I see her now, and just the Lord has blessed her with a family and blessed her in so many ways. And he continues to grow her and shape her and move her in certain directions towards him and to be more like him. And I know that community was the only thing that brought about that, because before she was completely isolated. She was on her own, and it just wasn't happening. And so, do you guys have any stories like that we could share with the audience? Because I'd love to celebrate what God has done and kind of end on that note.
I mean, I would say to start off, like my wife and I, just experiencing that and being a part of a church that facilitates that. So to some degree, that would be a huge thing for us personally. I would say one particular story comes in mind, though, is an individual that comes to our young adult, college and young adult small groups that was just, I don't know how he found us. I think it was kind of just a word of mouth type thing. He wasn't coming to our services on Sunday morning, but to use his phrase, I think he said, "I've been looking for something like this for years and haven't found it. And I think this is it." And so I say that not to plug, anything special that we're doing or not doing, but just to say, to highlight, I guess, the felt need that was in his life in that moment and how deep his relationship hole was with other people.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't think it was anything special about us, but he was able to come in, find a sense of safety, find a sense of common ground with people, and as far as his mental struggles, I'm not entirely sure as to what he was struggling with, but just a sense of peace that came about his life after the fact, and you can see it on his countenance.
It's awesome.
And so, yeah.
It's good.
I mean, I can think of countless clients where my treatment plan, so to speak, or the goals that we worked towards was getting them, one in particular, she lives in an apartment complex and she enjoys playing bingo now, whereas 3 months ago, she wouldn't leave her apartment. But I kept telling her, we always talked about it. And then she finally did it and she felt it. She felt the difference of having someone to talk to or having someone where you feel invested or someone's invested in you. Spiritually wise, there's one person that comes to mind and, she's like, "I think I'm crazy. These things that are happening to me." And she wouldn't talk about it. And then she did. And I'm like, yeah, that stuff's happened. And that stuff's happened to this friend and this friend and this friend and this friend. And so now it's like she's gotten these connections to people and, we'll send sermons back and forth and she can talk about it. Yeah. And she just said, I just didn't know. I just didn't know. If you were not raised in a church or raised in youth group and, you don't understand the bond that Jesus forms, in those moments. So that's definitely something I've seen on both sides of the spectrum for me.
Yeah, I love that. And as we're kind of going to wrap up today, I want us to really, as all of us and as listeners, to think about the fact, one of my main takeaways from this podcast has been that it's not one thing. It's not one thing that's going to solve the struggle that you're going through, but it could be, the all of the above approach. And I would say that it should be. You should be in community. That could be a next step for you at your church or at our church at First Moss Bluff is to find that community where you can really belong. It could be to seek out professional help through someone like Samantha, or even we have a biblical counselor here at the church, Roy Chapin. He's awesome. He's helped tons of people. He's booked, which means he's good. Mm-hmm. And so you want to call the office and make an appointment to see him. He's incredible. To talk with friends, maybe your next step to just start to open up and be transparent and authentic in that way. And so that could be your next step. It could be to look at some resources. And, speaking of resources, Samantha, can you tell us a little bit about your ministry that you guys have and maybe go into detail about what you guys offer and what y'all can do and where they can find those resources?
Yeah, so Holy Restored, as I mentioned earlier, it was birthed out of these community outreach nights that we had 2020 Now What? And we started that after, I think it was summer 2020. It was after the hurricanes. Maybe it was actually 2021. Yeah. But it was 2020 Now What? Right. Like, what do we do now? And so we had a night on trauma. And at that point, that was scary, because I knew that our community needed to accept trauma, but that word wasn't out yet. And so we had trauma, we had anxiety, which was huge. Those 2 nights we had grief, and then we had a teen night. And so out of that, what we did was we created e-courses. and videos where we have, one is a psychological, more of a teaching video. One is biblical truths video where Andrea, who's a Christian author and she's a teacher, she kind of walks through more of the biblical stuff for those issues. And then we have a teens version. So you can watch it, your teen can watch that one, or, it can go in part. And then we're also, like, we travel, we do retreats.
Yeah.
We've done retreats last year. We have 2 coming up this year. We go to schools and talk at schools. So it's just about, like, you can love Jesus and still have mental health diagnosis.
Sure.
And just because you have a mental health diagnosis does not mean you don't love Jesus. And just because you love Jesus does not mean that you have depression or anxiety or a mood disorder, bipolar disorder, a drug addiction, and so those are things that are, for our hearts, our ministry is just to reach those people. And we say in our videos, reaching out for therapy is very scary. But our videos can be purchased at holyrestored.com, and you can do them in your living room.
Yeah.
So it might be like, this is all you need. That's wonderful. Or it might be like, oh, that's an issue.
Yeah.
And I need to process one of those topics.
And we're going to link that in the show notes too, to make it easy for everybody to find and see that. And so I just want to encourage all of you to, as you're going through these struggles, as you're dealing with this, as maybe someone in your life is dealing with these struggles, I want to encourage you to just be patient. One of the worst things we can do is get in a hurry and want something to be fixed too quickly. Sometimes it takes time and just effort and consistency over time. And so be patient, be compassionate, and just be there for each other. Lean into your communities, continue these conversations with your communities. The more we talk about this stuff, the less scary it becomes, and the more healing that can actually come from it. So I want to thank all of you for listening to the First Take podcast. I hope it's been a blessing to you. I want to thank all of y'all for being here today as a panel. It's been a great conversation, and we'll see you next time on First Take.